Sarah Chen's fingers tightened around the delicate stem of her champagne glass as she watched the scene unfold before her. The engagement party was in full swing at the Grand Meridian Hotel's Crystal Ballroom, where Madison Wells, her best friend since childhood, twirled effortlessly in Thomas Richardson's strong arms. The couple moved with practiced grace, their bodies in perfect sync as they glided across the polished dance floor. The magnificent crystal chandelier above cast prismatic patterns across the room, its light catching the newest addition to Madison's left hand, a stunning 3-carat oval-cut diamond ring set in platinum with delicate paved diamonds along the band. Sarah's throat constricted as she recognized the design. After all, she had spent months subtly describing it to Thomas during their weekly coffee meetups at Café Laurent, presenting it as her own dream ring while knowing it was exactly what Madison had always wanted. They're perfect together, aren't they? Charlotte, Madison's younger sister, appeared beside Sarah, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Sarah managed to curve her lips into what she hoped looked like a sincere smile. Absolutely perfect, she agreed, taking another sip of champagne to mask the bitterness in her tone. What no one in the room knew, what no one could ever know, was that Sarah had been orchestrating this fairy tale from the shadows for years. It had started innocently enough. As Madison's best friend and self-appointed confidant, Sarah had naturally become the keeper of her secrets, dreams, and desires. She knew Madison's favorite flowers were peonies with scattered baby's breath. She knew Madison dreamed of a proposal at sunset, preferably near water. She knew Madison loved the subtle sparkle of oval-cut diamonds over the traditional round brilliant. What had begun as friendly attention to detail had evolved into something else entirely. Sarah had meticulously documented every preference, every casual mention of Madison's dream wedding, building a comprehensive blueprint of the perfect life, Madison's perfect life. Then, piece by piece, she had begun feeding these details to Thomas as her own suggestions. Thomas, have you ever noticed how beautiful the sunset is at Pier 17? She had mentioned during one of their coffee meetings, knowing it was Madison's favorite spot in the city. I've been thinking about rings lately, she had said another time, pulling up photos on her phone. Don't you think oval cuts have such a timeless elegance? The proposal had gone exactly as planned. Sunset at Pier 17, with peonies and fairy lights, and the exact ring Sarah had helped Thomas select. Madison had called her immediately afterward, crying with joy, never suspecting that her perfect moment had been choreographed by the very person who had secretly loved Thomas since their college days. Now, watching them dance, Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest intensify. Thomas looked dashing in his tailored navy suit, his strong jaw softened by the tender smile he reserved only for Madison. His dark hair was slightly tousled. He had a habit of running his fingers through it when he was happy, a detail Sarah had noticed during their many coffee conversations. Speech time soon, Charlotte reminded her, breaking through her thoughts. You know, as the maid of honor. Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively touching the note cards in her clutch. She had prepared the perfect speech, filled with touching anecdotes and well wishes. No one would suspect that each carefully chosen word was a tiny shard of her breaking heart. As the music faded and the couple finished their dance, Thomas pulled Madison close for a kiss. The room erupted in appreciative applause, and Sarah raised her glass along with everyone else, her smile never wavering. Let them all think she was the supportive best friend, the devoted maid of honor. They didn't need to know that behind her enthusiastic planning and helpful suggestions, a very different story was taking shape, one that would shake their perfect world to its core. 3 months into wedding planning, Sarah had transformed her home office into a war room of bridal magazines, vendor contracts, and meticulously crafted timelines. To anyone else, it looked like the dedicated workspace of an enthusiastic maid of honor. To Sarah, it was the command center for her masterpiece of manipulation. The corkboard above her desk displayed a complex web of sticky notes and photographs, each representing a carefully planted seed of discord. She stood before it now, adjusting a receipt from Bella's boutique, Madison's dream dress shop. Sarah had called them last week, posing as Madison's wedding coordinator, to reschedule the final fitting. The new time, of course, conflicted with Thomas's architectural firm's biggest client presentation. I can't believe they double-booked us. Sarah had sympathized with Madison over lunch. But don't worry, I'll take Thomas to his tuxedo fitting instead. You focus on your dress, sweetie. The words had tasted like honey on her tongue, sweet with deception. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Thanks again for helping with everything. Madison's so stressed lately. It's great that you're handling so much. Sarah smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before crafting the perfect response. That's what friends are for. Though I noticed she's been a bit distant with you lately. Wedding stress, probably. Want to grab coffee tomorrow and talk about it? These coffee meetings had become her specialty. Every Wednesday at 2 p.m., like clockwork, she'd listen to Thomas's concerns about Madison's changing behavior, changes she had carefully orchestrated, a rescheduled dinner here, a misinterpreted text there, all leading to tiny fractures in their perfect relationship. The wedding photographer had been her most brilliant move yet. After accidentally deleting Madison's original photographer's contact information, Sarah had recommended Elena Santos, whose portfolio she had studied extensively. Elena's signature style included subtle tricks of lighting and angle that made bridesmaids pop while slightly dimming the bride's presence. Madison, trusting as ever, had loved the artistic compositions, never noticing how each sample photo subtly emphasized her maid of honor's features. Sarah's laptop chimed with an email notification. The message from Riverview Gardens, Madison's dream venue, confirmed receipt of her anonymous tip about the health code violations. The resulting inspection would shut them down for renovations, conveniently right during the planned wedding weekend. It's a disaster, Sarah would tell the devastated bride tomorrow. But don't worry, I already put a backup hold on the Belmont Hotel. She glanced at the Belmont's contract, already signed under a false name months ago, waiting in her desk drawer. The wedding planning binder on her desk was a testament to her attention to detail. Each tab represented a different aspect of the ceremony, each decision seemingly made by Madison, but actually guided by Sarah's invisible hand. The florist who would accidentally include lilies, Madison's allergen, in the bouquet samples. The caterer who would serve Thomas's favorite dishes with ingredients Madison had mentioned disliking. Standing back, Sarah admired her handiwork. The real art wasn't in the big disruptions. Those would be too obvious. It was in the accumulated weight of small disappointments, tiny miscommunications, and subtle tensions. Like water wearing away stone, she was slowly eroding the foundation of their relationship. Her phone buzzed again. Madison this time. You're an angel. Don't know what I'd do without you. Sarah sent back a row of heart emojis, then opened her laptop to review her next phase of plans. The wedding was still 4 months away. Plenty of time to ensure that when things finally fell apart, no one would ever suspect the devoted maid of honor who had worked so hard to make everything perfect. After all, Sarah mused as she sipped her evening tea, sometimes the best way to destroy something was to look like you're trying desperately to save it. The night before the wedding, Sarah's apartment had become a shrine to 15 years of friendship. Photo collages covered every wall, fairy lights twinkled overhead, and the air was heavy with the scent of Madison's favorite vanilla-scented candles. Every detail had been calculated, down to the temperature of the room, exactly how Madison liked it. In her bedroom, behind a locked door, 6 empty bottles of sleeping pills lay hidden in her dresser drawer. The past week had been a careful experiment, testing different doses on the mice she'd bought from the pet store. She needed Madison to sleep through exactly 18 hours, enough to miss the wedding, but not enough to cause permanent damage. The guilt of these trials was buried beneath layers of justification. Oh my God, you still have this. Madison's delighted squeal drew Sarah back to the living room. She was holding up their old cheerleading uniform from senior year, the blue and gold fabric slightly faded but still pristine. Sarah had spent 3 hours steam cleaning it for tonight. Found it in my mom's attic, Sarah lied smoothly, watching as Madison pressed the uniform against herself. Remember how you always said your cartwheel was better than mine? Madison laughed, the sound piercing Sarah's heart. Because it was. Though you were always better at the pyramid formations. She paused, running her fingers over the embroidered school logo. I can't believe I'm getting married tomorrow. It feels surreal. Sarah moved to the kitchen, her hands steady as she prepared their tea. The chamomile blend was Madison's favorite. Another detail Sarah had perfected. The sleeping pills, crushed to a fine powder, waited in a small packet in her pocket. 3 months of research had taught her they were tasteless when mixed with honey. Speaking of surreal, Sarah called out, carefully measuring honey into Madison's cup. Remember that time we swore we'd marry brothers so we could be real sisters? The powder dissolved instantly in the hot liquid, disappearing without a trace. God, we were such kids. Madison settled onto the couch, surrounded by photo albums. Though I guess you'll be my sister tomorrow anyway. You know you're more family than my actual cousins, right? Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she carried the cups over. Here's to family, she said, passing Madison her tea. She'd marked Madison's cup with a tiny scratch on the bottom. She couldn't risk mixing them up. They spent the next hour flipping through photos, each one a carefully curated reminder of their shared history. Sarah had removed any pictures showing Thomas in the background of their college days, any evidence of her own lingering gazes in his direction. I'm getting kind of sleepy, Madison murmured around 10 p.m., right on schedule. The pills were working their way through her system. It's the wedding jitters, Sarah soothed, guiding her friend to lie down on the couch. Just rest your eyes for a bit. I'll wake you in an hour. Madison's breathing gradually slowed, each exhale carrying her further from her perfect day. Sarah sat in the armchair opposite, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Thanks for keeping her calm tonight. See you both tomorrow. Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her notebook, reviewing her timeline one last time. By 2 p.m. tomorrow, the church would be full. By 3 p.m., doubt would start setting in. By 4 p.m., Thomas would leave, humiliated and confused. And by 5 p.m., their perfect relationship would shatter under the weight of an inexplicable absence. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered to her sleeping friend, though the words felt hollow. But he was supposed to be mine. She checked Madison's pulse, strong and steady, exactly as her research had predicted. Then she settled in for her vigil, watching the hours tick away, each minute carrying them closer to the destruction of a perfect love story, and perhaps the beginning of her own. St. Patrick's Cathedral stood majestic against the clear blue sky, its Gothic spires reaching heavenward, as if in prayer for the crisis unfolding within its hallowed walls. Inside, 300 guests shifted uncomfortably in the wooden pews, their whispers echoing off ancient stone walls. The afternoon sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across Thomas Richardson's increasingly pale face as he checked his phone for the 100th time. Still no answer, he muttered to his best man Jack, who stood beside him at the altar. The wedding should have started 45 minutes ago. The string quartet had cycled through their repertoire twice, and the flowers were beginning to wilt in the warm June air. Sarah Chen paced the cathedral's side entrance, performing her role as the concerned maid of honor with Oscar-worthy precision. I've tried calling her too, she announced to anyone within earshot, her voice trembling with manufactured worry. This isn't like Madison at all. In the third row, Madison's mother, Eleanor Wells, clutched her husband's hand, her face a mask of growing concern. Something's wrong, she whispered. I'm going to check the apartment. As she stood, her cream-colored mother of the bride dress rustled against the pews. Thomas watched her leave, his architect's mind trying to construct a logical explanation from the chaos. Madison had spent the night at Sarah's for their traditional girls' night. She should have been at the church 2 hours ago for hair and makeup. Her phone went straight to voicemail. None of it made sense. The cathedral's massive doors groaned open again, and heads turned hopefully, only to see Eleanor's husband Richard rushing in, his face ashen. He made his way quickly to Thomas, whispered something urgent, and suddenly the groom's knees nearly buckled. Call an ambulance. Thomas's voice echoed through the cathedral. She's unconscious. The next 30 minutes dissolved into a blur of motion and sound. Paramedics arrived with efficient urgency, their radio chatter mixing with the confused murmurs of guests. Sarah watched from the shadows as they wheeled Madison's limp form out on a stretcher, her perfectly styled hair now tangled against the white pillow, her wedding dress still hanging unworn in the church's bridal suite. At Metropolitan General Hospital, doctors moved with practiced precision while Thomas paced the waiting room. Still in his wedding tuxedo, Sarah had followed the ambulance, maintaining her position as the devoted friend, all while methodically deleting evidence from her phone. Security camera footage, suspicious web searches, pharmacy receipts. "Mr. Richardson?" A young intern approached, clipboard in hand. "We've run initial toxicology screens. There are unusual substances in her system. We're running more detailed tests." Sarah felt her carefully constructed plan beginning to fray at the edges. She hadn't counted on the hospital's new testing protocols implemented just last month. The intern, Dr. Jessica Chen, no relation, thankfully, was fresh out of med school with a specialty in toxicology. "The results are concerning," Dr. Chen continued, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed the charts. "These levels suggest intentional administration, not accidental exposure." The word intentional hung in the air like smoke, drawing the attention of two police officers who had been quietly taking statements from family members. Detective Marcus Rivera looked up from his notepad, his experienced gaze sweeping the room. Sarah felt sweat beading at her temples. She had planned for so many contingencies, but not this, not a rookie intern with something to prove and a detective who specialized in domestic cases. As hospital security began reviewing visitor logs and surveillance footage, she realized her perfect plan had overlooked one crucial detail. In a hospital this size, there were always eyes watching. Madison lay still in her hospital bed, machines beeping steadily, while her perfect day unraveled thread by thread. Outside her room, Thomas slumped against the wall, his boutonniere crushed and forgotten. And Sarah, the architect of this destruction, stood at the nurse's station, watching her carefully constructed house of cards begin to sway in an unexpected wind. Detective Rivera spread the evidence photos across his desk like a macabre deck of cards. Each image told a fragment of a story that was becoming increasingly disturbing. The security footage from Lucky's bar showed Sarah Chen making 5 separate visits over 2 weeks, each time engaging in lengthy conversations with the bartender about mixing drinks. The timestamps matched perfectly with the bartender's sworn statement. She was obsessed with knowing how different medications might interact with alcohol. Tommy, the bartender, had admitted during questioning. Said she was writing a novel, but something felt off about it, you know? That's why I kept the receipts. In the adjacent interview room, Madison sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee, her wedding dress replaced by hospital scrubs. Her perfect day now 4 days behind her. On the table between them lay a stack of papers, text messages, email printouts, and surveillance photos, each one a new betrayal. "Tell me about the wedding photographer," Detective Rivera prompted gently. Madison's laugh was hollow. "Elena Santos. Sarah recommended her highly. Now I understand why." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the portfolio. "See how in every sample shot, the bride is slightly out of focus, while the maid of honor." Her voice trailed off as another piece clicked into place. Down the hall in the evidence lab, technicians were analyzing Sarah's laptop. The browser history revealed months of research: undetectable sleeping pills, how to erase security footage, perfect alibis for best friends. But it was her digital diary that proved most damning, meticulously documenting every step of her plan. Madison's teenage sister, Emma, provided another crucial piece. "I caught Sarah reading medical journals in the library," she testified. "She said they were for a health class she was taking. But I remember seeing diagrams about sleep cycles and drug half-lives." The investigation expanded like ripples in a pond. Thomas's secretary, Janet, came forward with a USB drive containing months of correspondence. "Sarah had access to Thomas's email for wedding planning," she explained. "But I noticed she was subtly altering messages between him and Madison. Changing times, rewording sentences just enough to create misunderstandings." Each revelation hit Madison like a physical blow. Memories began to reshape themselves. The mysteriously cancelled venue, the conveniently timed meetings with Thomas, the subtle comments that had made her question her relationship. Sarah had been conducting a masterclass in manipulation, and they had all been her unwitting students. The final piece fell into place when the hospital's security team discovered footage of Sarah accessing Madison's toxicology records. She had used her old student ID from a volunteer program, slipping into the lab late at night to attempt to alter the results. Dr. Chen, the intern who had first noticed the anomalies, recognized her from the footage. "It's fascinating, really," Dr. Chen explained to Detective Rivera. "She almost succeeded in modifying the records. But she didn't account for our new digital backup system. Every change leaves a trace." Madison sat in her apartment that evening, surrounded by the evidence of Sarah's betrayal. Wedding gifts sat unopened in the corner, cards expressing joy for a celebration that never happened. On her coffee table lay a photo album Sarah had made for the wedding, every picture carefully selected and arranged to tell a story that now read like a horror novel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Detective Rivera found more. Are you ready to hear it?" Madison stared at the message, remembering Sarah's words from their last normal conversation. "You're so lucky to have found perfect love." Now she understood. It hadn't been a congratulation, but a confession. Sarah hadn't just tried to steal her perfect day. She had been methodically dismantling Madison's entire world, piece by piece, all while smiling and holding her hand through wedding planning. The realization hit her. This wasn't just betrayal. It was assassination of the heart, performed with surgical precision by the one person she had trusted most. Dr. Patricia Montgomery watched with professional curiosity as Madison Wells laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise them both. It wasn't the nervous titter of someone processing trauma, nor the hysterical release of pent-up emotion. It was genuine, almost liberating, echoing off the walls of the therapist's carefully neutral office. "I'm sorry," Madison said, wiping tears from her eyes. "I know this should be devastating me. My best friend drugged me on my wedding day, manipulated my entire relationship, and basically tried to steal my life. But you know what I realized?" She stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "She failed at becoming me, so she tried to destroy me instead. And that's just pathetic." Dr. Montgomery set aside her notepad. In 15 years of practice, she'd never seen someone pivot from victim to victor quite like this. "Tell me more about this realization," she prompted. Madison turned, sunlight hallowing her figure. "Yesterday, I found Sarah's diary. Not the digital one the police have, her real one. It was stuck between my couch cushions from our last girls' night." She pulled out a worn leather notebook. "Want to know what's in it? 15 years of me. Every outfit I wore that got compliments. Every successful presentation I gave. Every guy who asked me out." She documented it all, trying to create some kind of Madison Wells instruction manual. The therapist watched as Madison flipped through the pages, her fingernails no longer chewed to the quick as they had been in their first session 2 weeks ago. "And how does that make you feel?" "At first, I was horrified, but then I started really reading it." Madison settled back into her chair, crossing her legs with newfound confidence. She wrote about my perfect smile and how she practiced it in the mirror for hours. My effortless grace that she took secret dance classes to copy. My natural leadership that she studied management books to emulate. She shook her head. All this time, she thought she was documenting my life, but she was actually writing a thesis on her own inadequacy. Dr. Montgomery leaned forward. "That's quite an insight. You know what the saddest part is? She got so caught up in becoming me that she never realized I'm not perfect. I stress eat chocolate at midnight. I cry at phone commercials. I'm terrible at keeping plants alive." Madison's voice softened. She wanted the highlight reel of my life so badly that she missed her chance to create her own story. The revelation had come to Madison 3 days ago, during another sleepless night. She'd been reading old text messages, trying to spot the manipulation, when she found a thread from 5 years ago. Sarah had won a prestigious photography award, but instead of celebrating, she'd spent the evening helping Madison prepare for a job interview. "Your success is my success," she'd written. The irony was staggering. "My parents want me to press charges," Madison continued, running her fingers along the diary's worn edges. "Thomas is furious. The police have a solid case, and everyone expects me to want revenge. She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. But I think I have a better idea. Dr. Montgomery raised an eyebrow. Oh, Sarah spent 15 years studying how to be me. But in all that time, she never learned the most important thing about Madison Wells. She stood again, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. I believe in second chances. Not because I'm perfect or naive, but because sometimes the best revenge is giving someone the opportunity to face themselves. As Madison left the office, Dr. Montgomery made a final note in her file. Patient shows remarkable emotional intelligence and resilience. Her chosen path of radical grace may prove more transformative than any punishment the legal system could provide. Outside, Madison paused to check her phone. A text from Thomas. Are you sure about this? She typed back a simple response. Yes. Sometimes the heaviest punishment is forgiveness. Trust me. Café Laurent hadn't changed in the 5 years since Thomas first met Madison and Sarah there. The same vintage posters lined the exposed brick walls. The same antique espresso machine hissed and steamed behind the counter. And the same bell chimed as Sarah pushed open the door, her heart thundering in her chest. She had expected police officers. Instead, she found Madison sitting alone at their usual corner table, a small velvet box placed precisely in the center of the weathered wooden surface. Sarah's steps faltered, her lawyer's warnings echoing in her mind. Don't speak to the victim. Don't go anywhere near her. Don't. Sit, Madison said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that Sarah had spent years trying to replicate. Sarah sank into the opposite chair, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt, a nervous habit she'd unconsciously copied from Madison years ago. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the diamond pendant at Madison's throat. A gift from Thomas on their 3rd anniversary, Sarah remembered. She had helped him pick it out. You're probably wondering why I asked you here, Madison began, her fingers tracing the edge of the velvet box. Why I'm not pressing charges. Why I'm not destroying your life the way you tried to destroy mine. Sarah remained silent, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under Madison's steady gaze. I found your diary, Madison continued, pulling the worn leather notebook from her bag. Sarah's breath caught. She had torn apart her apartment looking for it. Not the one you wanted the police to find. The real one. Your Bible of how to be Madison Wells. She set it next to the velvet box. 15 years of observation, analysis and planning. It's quite thorough. Madison, No. Madison cut her off, not unkindly. You've been talking for 15 years. Now it's my turn. She opened the diary to a marked page. June 12, 2018. Madison handled the Peterson account presentation perfectly today. Note to self. Practice her power stance in mirror. Study how she commands attention without being aggressive. She flipped to another page. March 3, 2020. Madison's new haircut frames her face perfectly. Makes her look confident but approachable. Book appointment with her stylist. Sarah's face burned with shame as her own words were read back to her. At first, I was horrified, Madison admitted, but then I realized something. You weren't just documenting my life. You were writing a manual for your own disappearance. She pushed the velvet box forward. Open it. With trembling fingers, Sarah lifted the lid. Inside lay the engagement ring. 3 carats of perfect clarity nestled in platinum, but beneath it was a USB drive. The ring is what you wanted, Madison said softly. The drive contains everything else. Security footage, email records, toxicology reports, your digital diary. All the evidence I could have used to send you to prison. She leaned forward. I'm giving you both. The fantasy and the reality. The dream and the nightmare. Your choice what happens next. Sarah stared at the box's contents, tears blurring her vision. Why? Because revenge is easy, Madison replied. Forgiveness requires growth, and you've spent so long trying to become me that you've forgotten how to be yourself. She stood, gathering her belongings. The police have copies of everything on that drive. Consider it insurance. But what you do next, that's the real test. At the door, Madison paused. Oh, and Sarah, the next time you want something, try being honest. It's less work than orchestrating someone else's destruction. The bell chimed again as Madison left, leaving Sarah alone with the ring she coveted, the evidence she'd feared, and the crushing weight of a forgiveness she'd never expected. She picked up the ring, its facets catching the light, and for the first time, saw it not as a symbol of what she'd wanted to steal, but as a mirror reflecting everything she'd lost in trying. The ring sat untouched in Sarah's desk drawer for 3 months, wrapped in the same velvet box Madison had placed it in at Café Laurent. Some nights, when sleep evaded her, Sarah would take it out, watching the moonlight scatter through its facets, each reflection a reminder of her unraveling. Her therapist, Dr. Marcus, had called it a powerful totem of transformation. Sarah called it her punishment, not because Madison had given it to her, but because she had to decide what to do with it. The USB drive, however, she had watched exactly once, forcing herself to witness every moment of her own calculated destruction of someone else's happiness. "Tell me about your progress," Dr. Marcus said during their twice-weekly session, his office becoming a familiar sanctuary of self-discovery. "I found my old photography portfolio yesterday," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "From before I started trying to be her. There was this series I did on urban loneliness. People in crowded spaces looking completely isolated. It won that award in college." "The one you never celebrated," Dr. Marcus noted, remembering their previous discussions. "Because Madison had a job interview that night." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "I convinced myself that helping her was more important than acknowledging my own success. That's when it really started, you know. Not with the drugging or the manipulation, but with that simple choice to erase myself." The autumn sun painted shadows across her therapist's desk as she continued. "I'm thinking about showing my work again. There's a small gallery in Brooklyn that's interested in the urban loneliness series. They want to pair it with new photos, same theme, but from the perspective of someone who's been on both sides of isolation." Meanwhile, across the city, Madison and Thomas stood hand in hand on a sunny beach in Santorini, their private wedding ceremony a stark contrast to the elaborate cathedral affair that never was. Madison wore a simple white sundress, her feet bare in the sand, while Thomas had foregone his tuxedo for linen pants and a white shirt. "You still sure about not pressing charges?" Thomas asked as they watched the sunset, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Madison smiled, touching the new ring on her finger, smaller than the original but chosen together, without any hidden manipulations. "The police have the evidence if she ever tries anything again. But Sarah's real punishment is having to become herself again. That's harder than any prison sentence." Back in New York, Sarah's transformation continued. The gallery opening was scheduled for spring. Her photographs, raw and honest, told stories of connection and disconnection, of the spaces between people and the bridges they built or burned. One piece, titled "The Mirror," showed a woman staring at her reflection, but the reflection showed a different person entirely. It sold for enough to cover 6 months of therapy. She used the money from selling Madison's ring to start a support group for people struggling with identity and obsession. The irony wasn't lost on her, the very thing she'd coveted becoming the seed money for her redemption. The USB drive remained plugged into her laptop, a daily reminder of how far she'd fallen and how far she had to climb. 1 year after the wedding that never was, Sarah received an envelope. Inside was a photograph of Madison and Thomas on their beach in Santorini, looking genuinely happy. On the back, in Madison's distinctive handwriting, "Creating joy is better than stealing it. Keep becoming you." Sarah pinned the photo to her inspiration board at the gallery, next to her award-winning photographs. Visitors often asked about its significance, and each time she told the story, it became easier to say, "It's about the difference between reflecting light and creating it." Dr. Marcus noted in his final evaluation, "Patient has achieved remarkable self-awareness, transforming her obsession with being someone else into a compelling exploration of authentic identity. The poison of her past actions has become the catalyst for genuine transformation." And in her new diary, Sarah wrote only her own stories, finally understanding that the best version of herself would never be found in the reflection of someone else's life.